Helen Russell is a best-selling author, journalist and speaker. Formerly editor of marieclaire.co.uk turned Scandinavia correspondent for The Guardian, her first book, The Year of Living Danishly, became an international bestseller optioned for television. She's the author of 6 critically acclaimed books, her most recent being How to Raise a Viking, a guide to Nordic parenting.
So that's how it happened. I was coached through it by these Viking teachers around me.
Yeah, it feels very refreshing. What is the thing that you think the sort of, not the best kept secret, I suppose, but the greatest thing that you've learned parenting over there?
I found myself saying this phrase that has gone down in family folklore of you can have a saw once you're 4 to a 2-year-old. It's just the norm here. We can't shut ourselves off to that, because then we shut ourselves off to life.
Helen, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I just want to start by asking, what on earth do you know that I can know and I can really put into action about how to raise children brilliantly, the Viking way?
Well, I would say first off, I am not the expert. I would never tell anyone how to raise their children because it is hard. And I am very much the idiot and the student in this. I am purely sharing the knowledge that I have been taught by much wiser parents than me in the Nordic countries over the last 10 years. So there are some quick wins. There are some structural differences that we can kind of lobby for. But I guess one really quick, easy one is just allowing time for play and not overscheduling, I'd say.
Yeah, that is a danger, isn't it, for parents, and especially in the way in which we live our lives now, where you feel like you've got to fill the day with everything, or you're not succeeding, and neither will your child be. So whether it's back-to-back clubs or school as well as clubs, or whatever it is, just filling the time non-stop. And actually, sometimes I suppose it's just good for them to be bored.
Yeah, really good. I heard recently that apparently imaginary friends are dying out because our kids aren't bored enough to come up with them. So yeah, the Nordic countries are particularly good at, I think, just allowing time for play. They even have 2 words for play. There's so big they named it twice. There's one for if it's imaginative, unstructured, and then another for if it's like games or music or sports or something. So they're very on it, very focused on play, I'd say.
Well, let's take it back then to how you ended up knowing so much about how to raise children the Viking way, because that is the book that you've just recently launched. And it is fascinating because different cultures do different things and have different approaches, which we can all learn from in different ways. I spent a portion of time in New Zealand and found myself taking Bellatrix, our 4-year-old daughter at the time, into a kindergarten there. And in the playground were axes and were saws in a sort of self-made sort of sand pit. And I thought, you're not honestly going to let me just leave my child here with other 4-year-olds as well as, my 4-year-old in this environment with wielding sort of saws and things like that with bare feet and everything else. That was the Kiwi way. That's the way they did things. And actually I had to pull myself together and say, just let her get on with it. And it probably was the best thing I could have done. So how have you sort of come to experience what you have? I mean, the story in which you ended up in Denmark in the first place, and you've had to sort of learn the Danish way. How did that evolve? How did that come to be?
Yeah, so I was living and working in London for 12 years as a journalist. I had no intention of leaving. And then one afternoon, my husband came home and told me he'd been offered a job in Denmark, and not Copenhagen, the bit everyone's heard of, but rural Jylland, working for Lego, the clicky brick company. And I was very skeptical to start with, but Denmark had just been voted the happiest country in the world. So as a journalist, I was kind of fascinated by this. My curiosity was piqued, and I began to research more about it. We didn't have children at the time. I'd been having fertility treatment for years, just seemed never to be possible for us. So we thought we didn't have that much to lose. So we moved, and I decided that we'd try it for a year. So it was only ever meant to be a year-long experiment. And then halfway through my first year, I found out I was finally pregnant. And then I went on to have IVF twins. The twin part was a surprise. So we kind of had a lot of skin in the Viking game, going from not thinking I could have children to having 3 of them within 3 years. We were really in the deep end, and I very much lent on the wisdom of the Nordic parents around me to learn how to do things, really. So that's how it happened. I was coached through it by these Viking teachers around me.
And did you have a similar sort of reaction to it that I did when I stepped into that nursery in New Zealand that time and thought, oh my goodness, I've actually got to leave my child in this scenario, bare feet, a saw, an axe, whatever other tools there may be lying around, and just sort of walk away from this and be calm about it? I mean, what was your sort of initial take and reaction and feeling about the environment that you were going to be bringing your own children up into?
I mean, yeah, absolute terror. I mean, my natural inclination is to bubble wrap my children, wrap them in cotton wool. In Denmark, they have this famous high levels of trust, and people leave their babies outside to nap in their prams. So when I saw that before I had children, I thought, well, that's absurd and terrifying. And what if someone steals my baby? And then an elderly neighbor pointed out, no one steals babies in Denmark. It's too much like hard work. So I never thought I'd do it. And then one day I kind of did, because all of my Danish mothers group friends were doing it. And then I had twins and I couldn't get a twin pram in anywhere because it's so enormous. So I kind of slowly acclimatized, but similar to you, my children have all attended the terrifying institution known as Family Scouts in Denmark. And that's basically letting toddlers loose with knives and axes. And I found myself saying this phrase that has gone down in family folklore of, you can have a saw once you're 4, to a 2-year-old. It's just the norm here. But yeah, absolutely took some serious getting used to.
I was going to say, like, the idea of leaving your child in a buggy outside a cafe or whatever it might be while you go in and grab a coffee. I mean, you can't, in the UK, you can't even leave your child in a car seat if you go and pay for fuel at the petrol station. So that is a really alien concept, isn't it? I can understand how that took a really long time to get used to. But why is there this sort of deep sense of trust in the community? Where does it all come from? Where do they get their confidence from that it's going to be okay?
I think that is a real kind of chicken and egg question, and there's actually still quite a lot of debate about that. It's a small country, of course, only 5.8 million, been homogenous until recently. So there is a real sense that people just do trust each other. 79% of Danes trust most people. But they've also found that people arriving in Denmark from low trust societies, including the UK, including other countries we might not think of as perhaps being massively happy, very soon, within a few months, end up adopting these high trust attitudes and score happier in these happiness polls as well. So there's something about the culture, the way they do things here, that helps people to feel more trusting as well. And actually, a lot of the research around risky play and adventure and giving our children that freedom that, as you say, we're so not used to in the UK, a lot of the research comes out of the Nordics. And they found that actually indulging in this risky play is really good for children. It has an anti-phobic effect, makes them less frightened of things, and can help them feel a mastery over their own body, can help them feel confident. So I had to have a massive leap of faith, really, that this was the way forward. There's a great word in Danish, tillid, which means trust and faith. And I had to have this real tillid that it was going to be okay. And it kind of was.
And what about during COVID? I mean, back here in the UK, we all kind of hunkered down, obviously, like we had to. And there is now a huge issue of mental health issues around certain age groups of children that obviously lived and came through that period of time. Perhaps, less unscathed than others. How did the Danish community respond to that? Because clearly that goes against everything we've just spoken about.
Yeah, and we went into lockdown actually a few weeks before the UK, and it was very, very weird. We were still allowed to go outside, and it's a largely agricultural country until recently, so there's still a lot of places you could just go walking in the countryside and not see anyone. There was a lot of testing. My children, they opened the kindergartens before they opened schools. So my children were able to go to daycare and kindergarten, vuggestue and børnehave, they call it. And it was very strange at the start. They were sort of in siloed, with fences between them. So they stuck to the small groups, the pods. We were allowed of up to 8 people. So it was very strange. But I guess Denmark as a whole, they have this high level of trust. They're quite good at following rules. And so they followed the guidelines. And this word samfundssind, another great Danish term, which means community mindset, really came out during the pandemic. And they found all these ways to pull together. People were helping their neighbours, just as they were all over the world. They were also doing these group sing-alongs, on these televised sing-alongs on TV every day that a quarter of the population were doing. So Denmark's answer to Gareth Malone, bringing the country together in singing. So it's just, that kind of, that spirit of real pull together.
That is so interesting, isn't it? It's kind of, and we'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a moment, because happiness is your other special subject. And it feels like that has a great big interplay with everything that you've just been saying. So with regards to the children and the parenting piece, what are they doing with their children, which is so groundbreaking and so different to other places in the world? I mean, I've seen you talk about the fact that they eat differently, they learn differently. I mean, what does that actually look like?
I guess from day one, there is a sense that you are bringing them up to be a member of a community. So children will go to daycare by the age of 1, and in that setting, they are actually expected to do quite a lot by themselves. So from age 2, they're expected to dress themselves, to go outside in snowsuits. They play outside no matter what the weather. So sleet, hail, snow, we get it all in one day here. They are encouraged to try lots of different foods. They are given quite a lot of freedom and independence, and taught to kind of look out for each other. It's not so much that there's an adult who is dictating the terms. They are really given a lot of power. That the daycare staff will say, oh, what should we do today? And someone might say, gosh, I really love tractors, little tiny Sven or whatever. And then they'll go on a field trip to go and look at some tractors. I mean, just they give them a lot of autonomy from a really early age in a way that I hadn't expected at all.
And how have you seen that play out in your own children? So what, in terms of when you look at their sort of how they've developed and how they're growing as little people, how have you sort of seen that affect them?
Well, I mean, my kids are still not great eaters, but there is more of a sense that it's kind of hard work in the short term, because there is a real sense that children are equals. They deserve respect no matter what. They all have a voice. They kind of get to do public speaking, for example, madly from around the age of 6. They stand up in school and talk about things and present in front of the class. So children are encouraged to find their voice and use it, which is exhausting in the short term, but I'm sure it's very good in the long run. There's this emphasis on jag kan gå itself. I can do it myself all the time.